Hi everyone, it's Mr. Sinti, and today I have the honor and privilege to be discussing with you the anatomy and physiology of the heart. And I just want to draw your attention to this painting right here. I just wanted to point out um, this painting is actually hanging in my lab room, and it's special to me because one of my daughters painted it, and it says down here, if you can see this, cor unum, which is Latin for one heart. The heart is a particularly special organ. I think we all know that. It's particularly special to the institution where I've been teaching for many years. And we have a saying at our school that the heart of education is the education of the heart. And I don't think it literally means the A and P of the heart, in other words, the anatomy and physiology, but something a little bit more profound. I think what the school's getting at is that like the heart, our students are going to go out and nourish and make the world a better place. And so I hope you enjoy this conversation that we have with the heart, and let's just sort of jump right into that. And so I wanted to point out to you something kind of cool that, the human embryo, this is a picture of a human embryo at just 5 weeks old. And the heart starts beating even before this, around 3 to 4 weeks, although you can't really hear it until around the fifth to sixth or seventh week, something like that. But it's amazing because just at this early stage in embryonic development, that heart is beating, and it's also very important. So why does the heart beat? Well, something kind of fundamental is that, as you can see here, these are typical cells, and cells require energy, and they require energy by using oxygen, which is being provided by red blood cells or erythrocytes, and that oxygen diffuses into cells, and the mitochondria uses that to burn glucose, which is also dissolved in the blood. And so that's pretty important. We don't survive very long without oxygen for respiratory purposes. And also the cell, as a consequence of respiration, produces, and I'll draw it over here, produces a lot of carbon dioxide. And so that needs to be removed from cells, or else it'll build up. And it also, the cells produce a variety of nitrogenous wastes that come out, and I'll just symbolize them as being like little molecules like this. And so what I'm getting at is that the blood needs to be flowing. And I think we all know that the blood needs to flow. And it's in order to do something really simple, which is provide nutrients to cells, oxygen to cells. There's other things in the blood, like, for example, hormones. But in other words, to transport materials to and from cells, because that's pretty critical. And so the heart is basically contributing to that blood flow by creating a circulatory system. And so what's fascinating, I found a lot of things fascinating about the heart, is that we have CT scans, or they're otherwise known as computerized topography, CT scans, which combine a series of X-ray images, and you can see incredible images like this, never before seen. And as a result of CT scans, we're able to import that into 3D printers. And 3D printers, I don't know if you're familiar with that, can actually produce three-dimensional structures. And we can construct a prosthetic heart. And it's a model. Instead of using the typical powder, it's a blend of different silicone gels, and it's really, really realistic. And it's kind of incredible. And it's like, this is important for future surgeons, for perhaps like training for heart surgery. Future surgeons used to rely on dissection, which is really important, but also plastic models. But this is really realistic, that you can actually practice your surgery on this 3D printed heart. And so, how big's the heart? Well, it's going to vary from individual to individual, but basically it's about the size of a human fist, a human heart is. And so it's around 14 centimeters long by 9 centimeters wide, so about a clenched fist, like that. Where's the heart located? You probably know that. It's located in the center of the chest, and it's protected by the breastbone or sternum. Now, in this picture right here, you can see the heart on top of the sternum, but it's really behind. And it's also protected by the rib cage. So it lies underneath the sternum, underneath the rib cage. And here's an x-ray of it located right here. And so you can see this really strong muscular structure below the heart, and that's the diaphragm, which is capable of contracting, allowing for breathing to take place. And so just wanted to point that out. When you're discussing the anatomy of a person's body, we usually refer to it as the person's right. So this is the person's right lung over here. And if I were to draw that in like this, here's the right lung like that. And here is the person's left lung like that, like this. And so the heart sits in between here. And then, as I mentioned before, really thick muscle underneath the heart down here is the diaphragm. And so the diaphragm is the basement of what we refer to as the thorax, which is this area right in here, the thorax. And so let me write that out, thorax. And so it makes up what is known as the thoracic cavity, and the heart sits in the thoracic cavity. Okay, as you can see, here is a picture of the thorax. Here's the right lung, the left lung, and the heart is sitting here. And again, the rib cage has been removed in the sternum, so you can see it. And it sits anterior to the trachea, which is right here, the windpipe. So the heart is part of the cardio, which means heart, cardiovascular, or vessels that carry the blood throughout the body. And so here's a picture of a heart right here in surgery. And here's the apex of the heart right here. Here's the lung. So let's establish a couple of terms that are particularly important in the vascular system. Like, for example, vein. Vein is a vessel that carries blood toward the heart. And so if I would just get, kind of silly, and I'll put the heart in like this. And so it's carrying blood toward the heart. You may be familiar with the fact that when the blood travels from the legs or the rest of the body and it's traveling up toward the heart right here, it's traveling in a vein because it's traveling toward the heart. And also deoxygenated blood, in other words, blood low in oxygen because the tissue has been using it from the arm, the right arm, and the left arm, and also from the head region, all travel in right here and deliver blood toward the heart. And so that is in a vein toward the heart. Now, what's interesting about this is that arteries take blood away from the heart. And so A for away from the heart, a good way to remember that. And so again, here's your heart right here. And so when the heart is pumping blood, let's say through the rest of the body, comes out, and it's being pumped in the form of an artery. So when it's going away from the heart, it's in an artery. Okay? Now, the heart pumps in what's known as double circulation. It pumps not only to the body, but it also pumps to the lungs. And so let's see if we can keep track of that. So if blood is traveling from the head region to the heart, it's coming down right here and it's coming toward the heart. So if it's coming toward the heart, that must be a vein. And here it is coming toward the heart right here. And so this is also a vein. And so here we could say, let me stay with this color. So here you could see the heart is going to be pumping, again, away from the heart. Okay, it's pumping away from the heart like this. And so this is an artery. Okay, and where is this going? This is going right here to the lung. And so this is a person's lung over here. This happens to be their right lung. And then over here, this is the left lung. Left lung. Oops, LL. Okay, so it's going away, but the reason that the blood is going to the lungs, you may know this, is that it's picking up oxygen and it's getting rid of carbon dioxide. And so then it needs to travel back, and I'm going to use red here because it'll signify the fact that the blood coming, in this case, toward the heart is oxygenated. It's going to be traveling in this vessel right here toward the heart, and so that is a vein, and so it's coming toward the heart, and so these are veins, and they're going to arrive here. Okay, and so then the blood is going to be pumped out of the heart over here, again in the form of an artery going away from the heart. So toward the heart and away from the heart. Okay, so let's get into some of the anatomy. It's very difficult for me to discuss that without using some of the terms, but I think I made it okay. So the heart, as you may know, and I say human heart, is made up of 4 chambers. And so it is made up of 2 smaller upper chambers and 2 larger lower chambers. And there are valves, 4 valves in total in the heart, and those help to prevent backflow of blood. And so let's take a look at this. On the person, so this is the person's heart. So this is their right atrium and their left atrium. Those are 2 small blood chambers at the top of the heart, and they're thin walled. So right atrium and left atrium. And then we have the right ventricle and the left ventricle down below. So those are the 4 chambers. There's a septum, which divides the atrium right here, as you can see, and also a larger, thick ventricular septum, which divides the 2, the right and the left ventricles. You can see here that the right side of the heart is blue, although it signifies that the fact that the right side of the heart is dealing with deoxygenated blood and the left side is oxygenated blood. The truth is the blood isn't truly blue. It's sort of darkish brown color when it's deoxygenated, and it's really, really bright red when it's oxygenated. But the blue and red is fine. So let's start naming some of these great vessels. And so, as I mentioned before, the blood coming toward the heart, right here, from the head region, is coming in from what's referred to as, and this is an anatomical reference, superior, meaning from the head or from above, superior vena cava, and that's entering into the right atrium. And then from the rest of the body, it's coming in through what's known as the inferior vena cava down below. And both of those enter into the right atrium right here. And that's deoxygenated blood. At the same time, blood is being taken from the lungs and delivered to the heart over here. And so this is also veins. These are referred to as pulmonary veins. These are the left pulmonary veins and the right pulmonary veins, and they enter into the left atrium, which is shown right here. There's valves that separate the atrium and the ventricles, and this particular valve, I'm going to make a video just on valves, and so don't worry if I go over this very quickly, but there's a valve called the tricuspid, meaning that it has 3 cusps to it. There's a tricuspid valve that separates the atrium and the ventricle over here on the right side. And this atrioventricular valve right here that separates the left atrium and the left ventricle is clinically referred to as the mitral valve, but it's also known as the bicuspid valve, meaning that it is made up of only 2 cusps. Okay? Here's a little bit of a picture of what I was trying to describe. This is if you were to slice the heart and remove the atria, so you could sort of see down just at the ventricles. So the atria have been removed. Here are the AV valves, which connect the atria to the ventricles. The bicuspid valve, as I mentioned before, is the mitral valve. So this is the left side. This is the right side, the tricuspid. You can see how there's 3 folds to it right here. Now, these particular valves right here are referred to as semilunar. They kind of appear, in my estimation, sort of like a half moon right here when they open and close. So they're like half moon, semilunar. And one's a pulmonary semilunar and one's an aortic semilunar. Let me take you over here. And so, as you can see in this diagram, the valve right here, it's not a great picture showing the valve, but I'll draw it in. The valve right here is the pulmonary semilunar, because when the right side of the heart, right here, the right ventricle is contracting, blood is flowing through the pulmonary semilunar valve, through what's known as the pulmonary trunk right there, because it's really wide and thick, and then into the pulmonary veins. I'm sorry, pulmonary arteries, since it's going away from the heart. Pulmonary arteries going to the lungs. And then the other semilunar valve, as you can see over here, is the aortic semilunar valve. And the aortic semilunar valve, let's say, here's the aorta right here. We go red with that. So here's the aorta, which is the largest artery. And so the valves preventing backflow, when the left ventricle contracts, it's pushing blood into this big artery right here away from the heart. And so this is known as the aortic semilunar valve. So there's a total of 4 valves. So what I was referring to before was the fact that the heart has 2 circuits. It pumps blood just a very short distance to the lungs in order to deliver carbon dioxide to the lungs and also to pick up oxygen. And then it pumps, obviously, to the rest of the body. And that's referred to as the systemic circuit, to all the systems, or the body. And pulmonary, which means lung, is the short distance to the lungs. And so let's take a look at this. So when the right ventricle contracts, it's pumping deoxygenated blood into the pulmonary artery through the pulmonary semilunar valves, and it's blue, and that artery going away from the heart breaks up into smaller blood vessels known as arterioles, and then capillaries, and in the lungs it picks up oxygen, comes back in the form of venules, and then a larger vein, and so you have veins returning oxygenated blood back to the left atrium, and that represents the pulmonary circuit, so down and back. So it's a short distance, pulmonary circuit. Now the systemic circuit is when the left ventricle pumps out through the aorta, through the rest of the body, and again through an artery, arterioles, capillary, and then all the organs are delivered with oxygen, and then the tissue picks up, the blood picks up carbon dioxide from the tissue and then delivers that back toward the heart, as I was mentioning before, in 2 great veins called inferior vena cava and superior vena cava. And so here's a picture of inside the lungs. You may be familiar with this. For example, I'll go black here. So oxygen is coming here through the bronchi, and eventually it reaches these small branches, the smallest branches of the bronchial tree or bronchioles. Then they fill up these air sacs known as alveolar air sacs. A lot of surface area right here. And so they're very thin walled, so thin that the oxygen is able to diffuse right into these capillaries. And so check this out. The deoxygenated blood is coming here from the heart. And so this is an artery from the heart, away from the heart. It eventually breaks down into an arterial and then capillary. So the blood's picking up oxygen. You see how it's getting red, really bright red. And then it's going to head back toward the heart. So this is the pulmonary circuit, if you're following this. So when it heads back toward the heart, it's going to be in a vein. So this is a capillary and then venule, and then over here it is in a vein, and it's going to head all the way back to the left atrium. So pretty cool. And so in the systemic circuit, though, let's check this out. So say that so the blood's flowing in this direction. Let's pick a color that you can see right here. So if the blood's flowing in this direction and it's going away from the heart, so this is an artery away from the heart, and then some of it will branch off like this, and arterial like this, and then ultimately into the capillary bed. And so what's interesting here is that this is where diffusion is going to take place. And so oxygen is going to diffuse into the tissues where it really needs it. Carbon dioxide is going to get picked up here. Notice the blood is not as bright red because it doesn't have all that oxygen. And so now it's heading back toward the heart. And so it's going to be in a venule over here and then up like this toward the heart in a vein. Okay, so basically it's a double circulation if you think about it. It's the pulmonary to the lung and systemic to the rest of the body. So if you were to trace the path of blood, and say we start right here in the right ventricle, it goes from the right ventricle this way, branches out in the pulmonary arteries to both sides of the lungs, comes back in pulmonary veins to the left atrium, then it goes into the left ventricle, then it travels up the aorta to the rest of the body. It could either go up to the upper part of the body or the lower part of the body right there. And so it's pretty cool. It's the right atrium and left atrium pick up blood simultaneously, and the ventricles contract simultaneously. So these are pumping and these are pumping. So the blood is flowing into the atria and then down into the right ventricle to the lungs, back to the heart over here, and then up and out the aorta over on this side. So let's talk a little bit about the coverings of the heart. It's interesting. The heart has a few layers, and I think without going into any detail, the take-home message about coverings of the heart or layers of the heart is that basically the heart is a big muscle, and I think that may be obvious. It is composed, since it's an organ. There's other tissues. There's connective tissue. There's nervous tissue, of course, and there's epithelial tissue. But it's mostly muscle, and it's mostly cardiac muscle. But I want to talk a little bit about these layers. And so first off, you may not have known this, is that the heart is actually enclosed in a protective sac called the pericardium. So peri meaning to around, so around the heart, as you can see it over here. It's pretty cool. And the pericardium is a fascinating thing, but I'll get to it in a moment. There are three distinctive layers of the heart. Again, the inside of the heart, and so this is where the blood would be over here. If I were to draw some blood over here, this is where you're actually in contact with the chamber of the heart. It's a very thin layer called endocardium. And then again, I was mentioning before, the very thick myocardium, which myo means muscle, very thick muscle. And this is what's really working hard. This is like doing all the work. And then out here is a very thin epicardium. Okay? And so there's three layers of the heart. And so one of the things about this is that this epicardium, there's some complexity to this. This is a cool picture of a dissected heart. You can see how the inside here is pretty thin, endocardium, the very thick muscle or myocardium, and then there's the epicardium over here. Now, let's talk a little bit about epicardium. It's made up of connective tissue and epithelial, and it houses blood vessels known as coronary arteries and veins, which are really important for nourishing the heart itself. Now, the heart is very generous in that it pumps blood to the rest of the body, but it needs to also give itself some oxygen as well. And so that's where the coronary artery and veins are located within this epicardium. Okay, and so there's also some lymph capillaries embedded in there as well. And so, it's as if, and this might be a little tricky to understand, it's almost as if the heart is, if you had a fist and you had a balloon filled with air and you pushed your fist into the balloon, what I'm trying to describe is that it would form like this indentation right here, this really thin indentation like this, like that. Like this. And so what I'm getting at is, okay, I mentioned on the inside was the endocardium. Okay, this is where the blood is. The myocardium is really thick, but this is what I'm talking about. This epicardium right here is, this inner lining right here, which is close to the organ itself, which is like referred to as visceral. It's the visceral pericardium right there. And then as it wraps around this way, it's referred to as the peritoneal pericardium. And so those two thin membranes are actually create a little cavity, which is called the pericardial cavity. And there's actually fluid in there. And the fluid is important. It helps to, like, prevent the heart from getting damaged in terms of trauma or shock. And it also helps to just keep the friction down. And so there's a little thin fluid in this region right here. And then on the outside of that, there's a really thick fibrous layer, which is known as the fibrous pericardium, which is shown on the outside right here. Okay, and so I like this diagram because, okay, here's the inside of the heart. Here's your thin endocardium. There's your thick myocardium. Here are your two layers here of the epicardium. But see, what's interesting about this is that this is referred to as I mentioned before, the visceral pericardium. And then this is the peritoneal, and then this is that cavity in between. Technically, this visceral layer and the myo and endo make up the actual wall, 3 layers of the heart. And then over here is this fibrous pericardium over on here. And so the membranes enclose the heart, and they consist of a fibrous layer here. That's all I'm getting at. And as I mentioned before, is this area right here is filled with fluid. And I was mentioning, again, before, I was foreshadowing, it protects the heart from external, like, jerking and shock like that. And so here's a picture, again, of the sac covering the heart, pericardium. And again, the middle layer, which is the most important in terms of what the heart mainly does, is acts as a pump, is the myocardium. And then on the thin inside is the endocardium, and that's made up of some connective tissue and epithelium. Okay, and then finally, I found this image that I thought was particularly cool here. This is an MRI photograph of a mouse heart, in particular just of the myocardium. And you can see all the different colors suggesting that indicating different directions of which the myocardium fibers are inside the heart. So it's sort of emphasizing the fact that the heart acts as a pump. And then finally, to summarize, again, the blood flow is deoxygenated blood is being received by the atrium, the right atrium, and then pumped to the lungs. And then oxygenated blood is being picked up by the left atrium and then delivered to the left ventricle and then pumped to the rest of the body through the systemic circuit. So I hope you enjoyed this look at the anatomy and physiology of the heart. I hope it was helpful. Thanks.